Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
So could you imagine growing up in a community of doomsday preppers? You know, the whole survivalist training and you're a teenager and you're not really living a normal life really at that point. And we're very excited because there's a new book coming out February 23rd, 2021 through Simon Schuster, Margaret K. McElderry Books. It is called Prepped. It's by Author-Bethany-Mangle. It's a young adult book, and we're very excited to have Bethany join us here on Big Blend Radio today. And go to her website, Author-Bethany-Mangle.com. You can pre-order the book or get it depending on when you're hearing our podcast here. But welcome, Bethany. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, this is exciting. Nancy and I we are all into this whole idea of, the prepping and the survivalist training. Nancy, remember way back when in the 90s, when we had our magazine in print, pre-podcast and even pre-Google era, I think at that time. Remember Y2K? We had advertisers that were. Remember, we had that guy who took the back page ad of the magazine, storage bins of all the food and all the
peanut butter powder, all these powders he was selling. We're like, what are you doing? But hey, you want an ad? Okay. Because, the world is coming to an end. So he was selling, yum, peanut butter powder. I can hardly wait.
I think there's some part of this that we should always be prepared, right, for stuff that happens. I mean, look at COVID situation. Everybody attacked the grocery stores, took all the toilet paper and all the pasta. So the survivalists were ready for this. So I was where did this all come from? It's like basing, Becca's story, which really goes into all kinds of things and all kinds of coming of age, scenarios. But where did the prepper thing come from for you?
So I actually got the idea while I was watching an emergency drill at work. So I work in the nuclear power industry, and so as you can imagine, you kind of have to be ready for anything, like no matter how improbable. And I started to think, what if you took that concept and applied it to like a teenager's everyday life where they were forced to be ready all the time for anything, and just kind of all the shenanigans that could happen around that.
Now working in the nuclear, that's kind of creepy. But things do happen, like the pandemic, right? That is that's one of those things that we don't think could happen, but we didn't think we were going to be locked up for 9 months. We're pregnant now. As we record this on this date. It's not 2021 yet as we record this, but those improbable things. But for a teenager, and I think your book is really something that they can identify with COVID-19 right now, where there's no end. There's maybe a vaccine, but it almost feels like there's no end. So the doomsday thing is kind of like there's this end looming, and it's not so great. But I think, teens would really connect with that storyline.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I wrote this, it takes so long for a book to come out that I wrote this way before the pandemic ever happened. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I always laugh about is on the original manuscript, my editor wrote in a comment box, "Oh, this is so clever," because I had referenced them being prepared for an epidemic. And looking back on that comment now in 2020, I'm like, wow, that really aged poorly.
Oh, wow. But, I don't think it's going to be the only one we have. I hate to say it, but it could be. I mean, come on, there's been other plagues and pandemics in the past. So I think, it's not your fault.
No, but isn't it kind of like, in a way, I'm trying to put my mind as if I were a kid today, which it's not that hard. I would just come up with, I would feel it would be necessary to take some sort of control because I would in this day and time be convinced that the adults don't know what they're doing. I think I would go there.
Well, it's like you said about Y2K. I mean, I remember being a kid when that was going on, and, when you're a kid, you think, oh, the adults know how to do everything, and then when you see them start to be nervous or just outright panic, then you're like, oh, no, what should I do? Because I'm supposed to be the one who's having a meltdown, and you're supposed to comfort me. So I'm sure, especially for young children, this has to be a really, confusing time for them because they're looking to their parents for direction, and, we just don't have all the answers yet.
Yeah, exactly. So now Becca, being with her family, they're kind of getting it, attached to this guy, Roy Kang, and, that happens in families. And it's not just the doomsday preppers, but it's no, we think you belong with so-and-so. And both families will, there's arranged marriages depending on cultures that you're part of. But that whole thing where this is who you should be with, not the hot dude on the motorbike.
Yeah, well, I figured since they have a plan for everything, and in the book they have 2 bunkers at this point because there's so many people in their prepping community, that they would also wonder, okay, so which people should be assigned to which bunker, and then, they make a lot of references to what happens if the apocalypse does happen, how are we going to repopulate the planet, and that's kind of why they're shoving Roy at Becca and saying, this is the person that we chose for you, to be with and date. And so when the book starts, they're supposed to have been kind of dating this entire time, but at the direction of their parents.
Well, that kind of goes back to even farming communities. They needed, they said that right now our population has kind of decreased, and the number of children that are being born. That may change after the pandemic, right? Because I know a lot of people got busy. Sorry, over the pandemic, but there was a slowing down of how many children were being brought into this world, because a long time ago it was you're having more children because you needed farm hands or an area did need population. So it's interesting when you bring that part in. It's okay, we're gonna. That goes into some elder cultural beliefs too, not just the apocalypse. That's kind of some older thinking, historic thinking. But then you look at the apocalypse, and that's moving forward too. So that's kind of an interesting thing that's going on with PrEP, is that you seem to be bridging the gap between then and now and the future.
Yeah, I mean, they use a lot of technology, and they don't avoid modern conveniences, but they always have a backup plan. So if you have something that you can use and it's electronic, then by all means use it, but you have to know kind of a redundant method that you could do by hand. And that's where a lot of this comes from, this kind of idea of historical ways of doing things, is that they don't want to rely on anything that uses electricity because the grid could collapse, and all these other sort of what if scenarios that are centered around the potential end of the world.
Now because of your work in nuclear power, did you have to do a lot of research, or for that whole part of it of being prepped and what they use grid wise and all of that?
I did do a lot of research because there are some kind of obscure references, like fertilizer and things like that I wasn't really familiar with. But I also joke that my husband is basically Sheldon Cooper from, The Big Bang Theory. And so he just loves going and he knows so much, and he'll do so much research about things. So sometimes I would just pop my head in and ask him about something so out there, and he would just know it off the top of his head. So it was nice too, because I kind of had a research buddy.
That's cool.
That's very cool.
Well, to me, that's something I would go down a rabbit hole on. You know what I mean? I'd be on YouTube looking at all the survivalist videos of how to do things. And, I think the survivalist communities kind of goes with the homesteading community too. There's that kind of balance of what if, and a homesteader, out there living off the grid is a little bit more prepared. So I think they kind of connect hands. But I would go off. I'd be stuck in there for a long time in that research.
That's kind of me with any research, though. I mean, on a different project I was working on, I just needed to look up one very simple fact, and then like an hour and a half later, I realized I had been reading about shrimp for like the whole time.
Oh my gosh!
It's like I'm learning how to make candles. All of a sudden, you have 10 different new hobbies that will help you, stay alive. So it's like, okay, we don't have electricity, so I'm going to try and make candles. And then figure out how you're going to make candles without electricity.
Yeah, there you go. So you have to go through that whole. But that's why we're the blend, because we can't just stick to one thing. It's like everything's interesting. You know what I mean? So, that's a cool part of it. But I think you've got such a interesting a backbone to your story. But then you've got the teen romance too. I mean, because that's something where they're also dealing with fear. I mean, because this whole society is basically based on fear, even though they're doing something towards the big event that could possibly happen. That's got to scare, Becca. Like that's fearful.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I kind of wanted to emphasize with Prepped is that unlike dystopian novels, nothing actually happens. And so it's not that the apocalypse happens and then you're watching, the characters trying to navigate this post-apocalyptic world. It's just the threat of the apocalypse that kind of disrupts their lives and, makes things complicated. And that was kind of an interesting thing to play with because there wasn't that like concrete thing. It was just in their community, the perception that something bad could happen. So as soon as you step outside that community and talk to a quote-unquote normal person, they're not going to have any idea, of what you're talking about.
There was a time in South Africa, it was around this time of year, close to Christmas, and for some reason, we had one client and some of the people that he knew that we happened to know. His church decided that the end of the world was coming before Christmas, and they picked a day, and they all got on their roofs, And so I'm like, okay, now this is really interesting because I'm like, okay, so there's a party at my place up on the roof. Are you going to go just because everybody else is going? Do you really believe the world's going to end? What does getting on the roof save you from? What it was the most bizarre thing, and I've watched people do it. And then a few days later, it's all over. Nobody died. Nothing happened. And the client he knocks on my door and he's like, "Merry Christmas. Here's a gift." And I'm looking at him like he just went back to absolutely like nothing had happened. And I'm like, this is so weird because people were standing on the roofs and they really thought something was going to happen. And then they were just, it didn't. And they go back to normal. I don't know. I thought it was very psychologically interesting, like how many of them felt foolish, how many of them never believed it, but thought, maybe just in case. It's an interesting idea, and I think it's interesting that how people react to something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Bethany was you saying that, Mary's talking about that reaction, but I mean that constant fear. That's that constant fear, which I think is scary to deal with and hard.
I would say so, and part of the dynamic in this prepper community is that Becca is like she was born into this kind of philosophy about always be prepared for anything all the time. So it's not something that she developed on her own. It was kind of just thrust upon her by her family as she grew up. And she also kind of processes this fear of the outside and fear of the end of the world by watching her sister, who is 10 years old and is still kind of figuring out where she stands in the world and in the community. And I really like being able to play Becca off of some of the older members of the community who are really, really diehard believers in the prepper philosophy, and that they should be closed off because you never know what's going to happen. And obviously, this is a very dramatized version. I don't actually think that the survivalist community is quite this far, but it really is interesting seeing all the different levels of commitment, I would say, to the idea that the apocalypse could happen tomorrow.
This is crazy. I'm super excited about this. I can't wait for young adults to read this. Do you think guys are going to read the story? Because you've got Roy in there, or do you think it's more driven for young girls to read it?
I'm not sure. There is a romance component. There's more of an adventure feel to it. So I think it'll appeal to a broad variety of audiences, and I don't really think I can draw it on that kind of a line. I think it's more about a person's preferences and what they like to read.
I think so too, but I think to me, it's I don't care how old I am. I like young adult books because they read quicker, and there's something that, that little girl inside. I was a little girl at some point, and I want to feel that part too. So I always kind of go, it's just really what you want. And to me, when you look at doing something on the whole prepper society, that is fascinating for sure. And what's it been like, even, getting this going, because I know it's, out there for pre-order. What's it been like during the pandemic and talking to people? Are people drawing those or connecting those two, issues together?
It's honestly been really stressful because no one has done this before, so trying to get ready for the book to launch, in general, we're all just kind of making it up as we go along because, book events aren't really happening, a lot of conferences are canceled or things are digital, so we're all just kind of trying to roll with it in that regard. But in terms of people connecting the pandemic to the book, I have had a lot of people say, oh, this is, really timely and it's going to apply to things that have happened recently, but I also understand that, some people might not want to read about the end of the world. It's just too close. With everything that's happened in 2020, maybe we don't want to read about the end of the world. So, I think that readers can go one of two ways there, and I'm not going to blame anybody who has just had their fill of thinking about the apocalypse after this year.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I was going to say, when we started our Love Your Parks tour, we printed T-shirts that said, "All parks matter," long before Black Lives Matter. Now we can't wear them.
I know.
Right. Things that happen later can definitely change.
Well, T-shirt designs can change. They absolutely can. They can change. But I don't know. It's interesting. But you also, the one part I wanted to talk about too is Roy and Becca, because it's an interesting relationship to think of. It's the sensible but not. It's the preconceived ideas of who someone is that isn't, opening your mind a little further than what you thought about someone. It's a very interesting relationship. Tell us a little bit more about them.
Well, in a lot of YA books, I feel like the romance is the main character meeting someone for the first time. And I wanted to start from page one and have a relationship that was already established, but it wasn't love. And so in the very first chapter, they're supposed to have been together for years at this point. And so after that long, you would think that they know each other, but they really don't. And so as the story progresses, they start to learn more and more about each other. And then Becca kind of realizes, oh no, I had this idea of Roy as a particular person, and now I think that maybe I was wrong. And she sort of looks back at everything she's said and done in the past based off of those assumptions, and then goes, oh no, maybe I have to change the way I've been thinking about him all along. So I just wanted to take a normal, linear, they meet, then they fall in love, and kind of just make it a big noodle.
But I also like it that she's having to think about she has to change her mindset, and that's part of growing and developing. And I think it's an important thing to have in there for young adults to understand that you can change your mindset, that you can make decisions that way, and you do need to look inside, and I think that's another important thing you've brought up in the book. But also, I do want to touch on that Roy is also Korean, and that's also something that resonates with you being Korean American. I think we were just listening to an interview on NPR on one of our drives, and it was a Korean chef, and he was talking about growing up Korean and people not understanding what he was bringing, to school for lunch, and how that connection where people there's now it's a little bit different. People understand Korean food, but back then when he was in school, he had issues with that. So is that also part of the reason? Is just for people to understand that you can, bridge those gaps if they're out there?
Yeah, Roy being Korean is definitely intentional. I don't see a lot of just Asian characters in general, whether it's movies or, novels. A lot of times when I do see Asian characters, they're meant to be funny. They're in some kind of role where it's funny. And so I wanted to show, hey, you can have an Asian love interest. And I also wanted to show Roy as not being, I don't want to say not being stereotypically Korean, but I wanted to show that there's nuance to culture. So I was born in Korea, but I was adopted as a baby. Now, my parents sent us to Korean school where we, took Korean lessons and cooking classes and things like that. So we have some cultural knowledge about, being South Korean, but we didn't grow up raised in a Korean family because my parents are white. So, to me, being Korean is a really nuanced kind of experience because it's something I share with my brother. But, again, it's not my entire family. So I wanted to show that as well through Roy that, not every Korean person was raised in a traditional Korean household with all of these stereotypical things that you tend to see on TV or, in books. And so I just wanted to kind of have the opportunity to showcase that just like any other person, that these characters can have different levels of cultural attachment and that identity is kind of a spectrum in that regard. So Roy is in touch with, being Korean, and I do kind of add a couple, cultural references in there, but it's not an enormous part of his life.
It's kind of like, I think that's the interesting thing of what's now. I think that the younger generation, especially now, they're going through, it's now creating, we've got definitely cultural divides that are going on in the country and cultural issues of people not getting along or acceptance. We don't even like the word tolerance because it sounds like, oh, I tolerate you. You know what I mean? It's just like, no, it's about getting along and actually finding and that's again, the beauty of young adult books is developing your identity. And that's that coming of age of understanding this is who you are. And it could be, hey, a little Korean. It could have a little bit of African in there. It could have a little bit of everything or not, not nothing, but you know what I mean? It's not just your culture. It's about who you are as an individual and developing that. And I think that's what's good about your storyline.
I think when it comes to different races, that racism is a learned behavior. It is not you're born that way. Really, that you're born racist. I don't believe that at all. I think you learn it, and if you learn it, you can unlearn it, and you can educate yourself to figure out why you might be feeling the ways you might be feeling. I know my parents were extremely racist, and so much so that as every good teenager does, you go the opposite direction. So racism doesn't. I went off and lived in Africa. I'm like, here, how about that? Look at that. Just because it was such a shoved down your throat thing. And now they're both passed away now, but as they got older, I think they also wondered why they were so racist. And I think it was because, at least on my father's side, for sure, he was taught to be that way. On my mom's side, I think she picked it up from my dad. I don't think she was always racist, but it was really kind of shocking. And, and I think, when Lisa was a little girl, she played with everybody. There was no, don't play with that person over there because of this. It just, and so I know
I was
that
the token white kid everywhere. It was a different, when you say there wasn't so many, not so many Koreans in books and movies and things, and it's always kind of that weird thing where, hey, here, you get to play this role because the character's Korean, so now you get to do that because you're Korean. And not always, that doesn't even always happen. You know what I mean? And so I think it's really good that you've included that. As a kid growing up, I was always that, especially at a very young age in Kenya, I was like, you're the white kid that makes our school multiracial. So, there's that flipped over thing, then I understand that. And I think, I mean, I didn't realize until you were talking in your book, how many times do you read about a Korean in a story? Unless you're reading
exactly.
Korean
I mean, that's
literature.
kind of the push behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is really cool because, hey, there's a lot of Koreans in the world, and they've got to have their place in literature and movies and films. And do you feel that with movies? Like, would you like this to become a movie and then have an actual Korean play a Korean role? Because I don't think it's always a Korean playing a Korean role.
I mean, yeah, that would be amazing if this ever became a movie. But yes, I would absolutely want a Korean actor to play Roy. And, that's kind of the basis of the whole we need diverse books and own voices movement is just that people have a right to tell their own stories and that kids deserve to see themselves represented in fiction, whether that's, a different race, a different religion, disability, whatever it is, that they should be able to read about themselves and identify with those characters and say, hey, look, this character is just like me, because that can be life-changing to a child who feels lonely or left out or different, to know that they're not the only one, and here's the proof in this book that they just checked out from the library or that they read in school or something like that.
I love it. And why did you choose young adult? Like, when you think about it all.
Hey, when I first started writing, I kind of bounced around.
Sorry, I just want to tell our audience, sorry, we all have barking dogs, and that's just the way it is. It's a pandemic. Yeah. We all have dogs. Sorry about that. I was just laughing because I'm like, it's your turn. The dogs are turning the bark. But anyway, carry on about the young adult side versus doing it, for adults.
My dog just wanted to give his 2 cents.
I know. I love it.
For young adult, it just felt the most natural to me, and I always joke it's because I never grew up. I'm just kind of a dry and sarcastic person, and that's really the voice of the narration style, and that's kind of true of all of my books, is I'm just a very sarcastic person, and I think it lends itself well to that kind of teenage perspective where you're, you don't want to go to school, you don't want to clean your room, you don't want to go to work, you don't want to, just that kind of mindset I think works really well with kind of having a snarky commentary on everything.
Well, I think that's really cool because I know when you're growing up, your parents usually get together and they have their mantra, like, okay, now you're getting older, you need to start making your own decisions, but make sure you save money. You need to make your own, go clean up your room. You need to make your own decisions, but not until I tell you to. It's kind of, it really kind of comes off that way because, it's like, are you an adult or are you still a kid? Which is it? When's the crossover point where you can now, I'm an adult now? And, I always think it goes by subject matter or by things that happen, like, this happened, so I'm in kid mode. Over here, this is happening, and I'm going to be in adult mode. So there is no hard and fast rule of being grown up.
That's really a central point in Prepped as well, because Becca is when in the first chapter she's just about to have her 18th birthday. So she's kind of in that weird before and after point, but she's also very grown up because she has a younger sister that she looks after and she has to deal with very adult issues. So it's interesting to see how that lines up with her age because technically when you first meet her, she's 17, so she's a child, but she doesn't act like a child. She doesn't have to deal with kind of childish things. So that's something that I really enjoyed kind of exploring through the book is the role of age versus your level of responsibility and what you have to worry about. And I just love that teenage, late teen period where you're like, oh no, I'm about to be on my own potentially. What do I do now?
Yeah. And at the same time, you feel invincible too. But she's coming from a different background of doomsday, you know. So it's that whole. There's something. You have those up and downs. It's like every few hours you have a different emotion too. Like it starts at like 15, 16. There's those moments where I'm this, I'm that. Then it's like I'm not. You know, the confidence level changes. Fear. I would go fear. Fear is in there. You know, and that's something that I think kids, you know, our youth struggle with, and also just so much overload from what's going on in schools and things. You know, it's like education has become so heavy, and I feel like, you know, kids need a good book, you know, to identify with and identify with characters, and like you're saying, and they co-create too. You know, they're like, oh, this character did this and that, and maybe I can do it this way. And I think it's a big responsibility to write a young adult novel. Did you feel that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I totally agree with that because you're speaking to kids who are still like forming ideas about themselves and they're learning about the world and their role in it. And that's another reason why I really wanted to have Roy be a Korean character to show, look, you know, you are valued, you do matter, you belong in fiction just like anybody else because that's the time that you're looking to shape your identity. And we do look to things like books and movies and other people to help inform our opinions about real life. And when you're a kid, you might not always have that exposure yet. So you're kind of living through the media that you consume.
You know what's interesting? You know, you talk about, you know, here's the role model, like he's a role model, right? He's in a book as a Korean young adult, and you know, we always talk about on these shows and with authors, hey, if your book was turned into a movie or a TV show, who would your, you know, actors be, you know, for your characters? So when you think about it now, immediately to Roy, who would your actor be? And you know, when normally people will have like, oh, I'd love this person, that person, but I don't think anyone said anyone Korean that I know of. Like, you know, you could probably count Korean actors on your two hands. That would, you know, I'm going to say I don't know at all. Like, who would it be? So that's
right. And I've never thought about it in terms of like this specific person would be great. It's always just I have a vague idea of what my characters look like in my head, and you know, I was like, I would know the right person. I think if they showed me a picture and said, hey, do you think this person could be Becca? This actor could be Roy? I would say yes or no. I mean, I have a picture in my mind, but I've never actually gone out and found a specific actor that I thought lined up perfectly with kind of my cast.
You know, I bet you. I'm still going to get in trouble for this. I bet you if you ask people that, they'd say Bruce Lee, even though he's from Korea.
Bruce, a little older. It's a little older, you know. But that's my point.
I know,
is like you're making people think, oh, wait, you know, it's because it's an important piece of the story is that he's Korean. So you do have to have a Korean actor, and I think that's cool. So all right. So when's the movie coming out, Bethany?
In my dreams so far.
Yeah, you know, so do you see yourself writing like a sequel to this or, you know, doing another young adult novel or another novel? Because I know you do a lot of writing, and everyone, you can go to Bethany-Mangle.com to learn more and go connect with her writing as well. But now that you've written an entire book, do you see more in your future?
Yeah, so I am a really scatterbrained writer. They call us pantsers because we write by the seats of our pants. I don't outline or draft. I don't outline or plot ahead of time when I'm drafting. So sometimes I'll write something and I'll have a third of a book and I just won't know what happens. So it'll just go in a folder, and then I'll write something else and I'll get halfway and go, I don't know what happens, and I'll put it in a folder. So sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 different projects at the same time, and I'm just kind of feeling out which ones are worth saving, I guess, which ones I think I can finish and finish well, and I can't do that from an idea, and I kind of envy people who can. I always have to start writing it first, and then I'll say, I don't think I have enough material here, or I can't develop this relationship the way I thought I could. I'm going to scrap this one and start something different.
Do you ever look at people in the supermarket and you're like, ooh, I'm going to write you in my book?
Actually, I have. And I've even thought that about, I vividly remember this. I was in line at the pharmacy, and there was this really old truck. And it was just so distinct, and it was like a snapshot in my brain. And I said, that is just a really cool image of this really, really old kind of classic truck that is in a random place for no reason. And I sort of have a little folder in my brain of all these little things that have stuck out to me. And then when I'm thinking and writing, I'll say, oh, man, I'm going to make a character out of, that lady at the grocery store who wore that funny hat or something like that. There's always some reason that a person stuck out to me, but that's kind of why I love people watching, is it's inspiration for real, actual people, and it helps me describe people, I think, in a more authentic way.
The best place to people watch is Las Vegas. It's the best. It's so much fun.
I've been there, so
it's
really
interesting. But people they're acting out in a different way than what I like watching people in their own community do their day-to-day stuff. Because you just it's like our favorite things when we're traveling is, which we're always doing, is driving into a town at dawn and seeing everyone's lights turn on, like in a city, like people getting up. If you drive through a suburb and people are waking up and you're wondering, what are you doing today? Why are you getting up at 4 a.m. or 5? Or, what's going on in that house? It's I don't know, man. It's all cool. It's just people watching is cool. If I was an artist, I would be painting people watching things, scenarios of watching people do things, people in a park, all that good stuff. I would paint someone, getting their big, barrels of peanut butter powder. Peanut butter with it, all the rationed food and stuff. It's like when you think about it.
You're gonna make me hungry for peanut butter.
I love peanut butter. Oh my gosh, homemade peanut butter, fresh peanut butter. Oh my gosh, can't beat a peanut butter jelly sandwich. I know, I know, it's crazy. It's good stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited for your book to come out. Everyone, again, you can go get it. February 23rd is 2021 is the date it releases, but you can pre-order it. And so it's called Prep, and it's by Bethany-Mangle, and you can go to Bethany-Mangle.com. And am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Because it could be Mangle. You never know.
No, it's Mangle.
Okay, just making sure. I always get things wrong, so at least I'll get something right today. Now we got to play a song. This is dedicated to Becca and Roy. This is a song that's from Australia, because why not? This is from Dino Jag, and you can go to DinoJag.com. DinoJag.com, and this is his song called Two Young Hearts, so dedicated to Becca and Roy, and to Bethany for her first book coming out. So thanks so much, Bethany.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
We were two young hearts shooting for the stars. We made it to the moon, but we got lost on Mars. We traded diamond rings, we thought we had a lifetime thing, but it got messed up. I didn't feel you 'cause I didn't give enough. If I could press rewind back to that time you first caught my eye, I'd go back now, bring out the violins. This time you'll feel my fire. Oh, you look so good, like a queen. You were such a dream, but I didn't know how to treat you then. I should have showed you that I loved you more than anything. Now all I wanna do is make you feel, make you feel, make you feel the best. Why don't we sail away, me and you? We could start again, brand new. We could have another dance. We deserve a second chance, 'cause two young hearts fall in love again. I'm gonna pick you up at 8. I won't be late. I'll be knocking on the door. You'll be running down the hall. It's gonna feel so wrong. I'll hold your hand and kiss you on the cheek as they play our song on the radio. I won't let you go. Why don't we sail away, you and me? We could start again, break free. We could have another dance. We deserve a second chance, 'cause two young hearts can fall in love again. We're falling in love again. We're falling in love again. I know that we will shine even brighter than the first time. I've learned from my mistakes. Lord knows I've changed. I've drowned in tears of pain. It's so cold without a flame. It's not the same without you by my side. Now all I wanna do is make you feel, make you feel, make you feel the best. Why don't we sail away, me and you? We could start again, brand new. We could have another dance. We deserve a second chance, 'cause two young hearts are falling in love again. We're falling in love again. We're falling in love again. We're falling in love again. Now we're heading for the Milky Way, looking for a place to stay, like you